Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news hour, we would be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu newspaper. The news page, there is an article about India-Russia oil. Russia offers more oil to India. Because of the sanctions imposed by USA and all the European nations on the Russia, now the Russia is not able to export its oil to those countries because USA has outrightly banned importing Russian oil, and even the European countries, they are reducing the import of Russian oil and natural gas. They are trying to reduce the dependency on Russia. In this situation, Russia, which produces major oil, it has lot of stocks of unsold oil, and the Russian economy is dependent on oil revenue because almost one third of the government budget is composed from the oil revenue. So in this particular time, if Russia has lots of oil stock which is not sold, it is bad for the Russian economy, and it is also incurring costs because of the Ukraine conflict. So Russia has offered India oil at a concessional rates. This situation is helpful for India because we would be able to import Russian oil at a concessional rate at a time when the global crude oil prices are increasing. It is a good alternative for India to import Russian oil. In the business page, the conflict might impact India. The RBI Deputy Governor has said that even though India has very limited exposure directly in finance related to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, it has secondary impact like the increase in the oil prices and the semiconductor shortage, which would affect India, which would affect the car sales in India, all the automobile industry in India, and it could impact the US dollar funding because at a times of global mishaps and wars, droughts, the investors who want to invest in other countries, they would be very careful. The risk assessment of a country would increase, and they would want premium returns for their country because if an investor is willing to put his money, he wants more return for the extra risk that is taking. So now, because of the US federal government policies and the conflict and the global instability, the capital might move from India, and which would affect the Indian rupee adversely. The value of rupee would fall, which is bad for India. Here again, there is a news article about the neon output from Ukraine. Ukraine produces almost more than half of the neon, which is a key raw material ingredient in producing the semiconductors, the chips. So if the raw material is stopped, the semiconductor would be affected. We also saw how the palladium imports come from the Russia and Ukraine. So if the raw materials of a semiconductor manufacturing sector are affected, the supply chain would get disrupted, and the semiconductor industry, which is already suffering some shortages, the shortages would increase, and this would directly affect the telecommunication sector. The 5G rollout in future in all the countries would get delayed because the equipment is not available, and the automobile sector also would be directly affected. There is a chip shortage already, and the conflict is just aggravating and increasing the shortage that we are going to get. Two main companies which produce neon gas are the Ukrainian companies, and they supply more than holds half of the neon gas supply. And few of the companies like the Taiwan's manufacturers in semiconductors, they have extra stock of neon supplies. They have the safety stocks. But what about those countries which do not have the additional stock? Their manufacturing would directly get impacted. And during the pandemic, the demand for the electronic goods rose tremendously. The cell phone, laptop, and also the automobile sector and the artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, all this drove the semiconductor industry's chips demand. One side, the demand for the chips increased, but because of the pandemic, the production decreased, so there was a shortage. Adding to this, the global shipping costs increased, the freight costs increased because of the container shortage in the shipping industry. And adding to that, the oil prices fluctuations, and now the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the key raw material ingredients which are not available. So you can see how each of the macroeconomic thing is impacting the economy as a whole, and how everything is interrelated, and the impact of everything is felt on everything else. Here we just need to read the headlines of the article. Because of the conflict and the volatility in the stock market, the government which had planned to go for the initial public offering of the LIC, it might delay it for some time when the market tries to stabilize. Startups eyeing IPO may face tighter valuation scrutiny. In the startup community, there is a broad precedent of valuation game. What is valuation game? Valuation is nothing but calculating the worth of the business based on so many factors. What would be the future performance of the business? What would be the revenue of the startup? They would look at how many monthly new users are being added to that particular business. So based on that, they would project the sales and they would value the company. Now a particular startup, in the initial days, it would raise money and it would give lot of offers and discounts to consumers, because of which the consumers would download the app, they would install the app because they are getting cashbacks. For example, they would show this number of customers who are getting into their business, and they would raise money from the investor, and they would use that money again to give cashbacks, and again lot many consumers will go and install that app and start using that app. But what happens after the cashbacks reduce? People stop using it. Most of the people will uninstall that app, especially in India. But what about the investors who invested, seeing the projected sales? They saw a higher valuation and put money. But now the actual reality, in the actual reality, the business doesn't have that many customers, because when the cashbacks stop, the customers also stop using that particular app. This is the valuation game that was going on. And many of these tech companies, they used to go for initial public offering, and it happened with Paytm that the valuations that they showed and how the stock market responded by not subscribing to the shares of Paytm at an expected level showed to SEBI that okay, this valuation game is affecting the stock market. The customers are getting misled. Now the SEBI wants the startups to show to the people that how are their valuations made. It wants to look into so many non-financial metrics which are called the key performance indicators. There would be something like number of downloads, average time the customer spent on the platform, what is the time taken for the goods to be delivered, all the things which relate to a business which are not financial in nature. They would measure the core performance of the business. So SEBI wants to the startups to justify their valuation. The people working for the startups, they say that this will just increase the cost of compliance, because how do we measure something which is not financial? How do we measure which is something qualitative? And how do we relate it to the numbers, the valuation? Even if I say there are these many downloads happening, how would I express it in terms of amount, express in terms of money, and put a valuation for that? That is not directly possible. And they also say that SEBI is going to tighten rules like this. The startups, they are not going to register in India, they would register in foreign countries, because there the rules for listing on the stock market are easier than what it is in India. So they would just, instead of registering in India, they would move to the foreign markets. We'll have to wait and see what would happen. Again, here we just need to read the headlines. Balancing inflation and growth is the key, says Finance Minister. We should know that the government and RBI, on one side, they have to control the inflation. On the other side, they have to make sure that growth is also happening. Both controlling inflation and working for both, it is contradictory in nature, because if you try to control the inflation by putting strict measures, the money supply in the economy would reduce, the business consumption would reduce, production would reduce, the incomes would reduce, and the growth will get affected. But if you go for easy monetary policy, the money supply increases, consumption increases, demand increases, finally the inflation, the prices also increases. So both of these are contradictory in nature, but as we say, we need to know what is the middle path. At particular point in the economy, the RBI and the government will decide, okay, at this moment going for a growth outlook is better, okay, at this moment controlling the inflation is better. So we need to balance both the contradictory options and make sure that growth is happening in the economy. RBI bars Paytm unit from adding new customers. RBI has issued directions to Paytm that they have to conduct a system audit of their IT infrastructure system, and RBI has given direction under its regulatory power. This point is important for prelims. Under the section 35A of the Banking Regulation Act 1949, the RBI has given the order for the payments bank. So the Reserve Bank derives its powers under the Banking Regulation Act to issue a special audit direction for the payment banks which are registered under it. So here the question could be that RBI derives its power from the RBI Act. Here giving directions to a registered bank comes under the Banking Regulation Act. So RBI derives its powers from the Banking Regulation Act 1949 section 35A to give issue directions to the bank. Again, just the headlines. We need not go through the details of all these articles. Here we just need to know as of now that India and Canada are in talks to have a trade agreement. Those are the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.